Hello everyone, I'm Tamara Banks. Welcome to this edition of Dialogue Denver DA. Mitch, great to see you again.
Good to see you, Tamara. How are you?
I'm good, good. We have a rock star for a guest today.
Yes, we do. We have Carmen Carter here. Carmen, she works and has worked for years with what's now called the Blue Bench, which is a very important nonprofit in our city that helps victims of sexual assault.
Carmen, tell us a little bit about what the Blue Bench does, and it was formerly known as RAP, the Rape Assistance and Awareness Program?
Correct, yes. We changed our name just a year ago, so we're excited to have the new name, and it's part of creating an environment that's welcoming for anyone who's been impacted by sexual assault, which is part of the brand change for sure. So, and we provide, we have a 24-hour hotline, and that is ran primarily by volunteers. So we work with a lot of volunteers in the community, and we'll respond anytime, any day, to folks who call into that number. We also have a 24-hour response to the hospitals with volunteers and staff who respond. In Denver, it works very well that we are called directly by Denver Health Medical Center when a victim is brought in there, and we get to meet them at that time, sometimes for short periods of time, sometimes for hours, depending on what they want, but they at least know right away that we're a resource available for them.
And tell us about the name change. Why go from RAP to the Blue Bench?
You know, we did a lot of research to people who knew us. We'd had that name for 30 years, and so, but I'd gotten a lot of both negative and positive feedback on that name. And when we talked to clients particularly, what we heard from a lot of them was they didn't like the name with rape in it. There was a real resistance to calling us, which was exactly the opposite of what we had hoped to create. And so, and I think times had changed. I think there was a time when having rape in the name was so important. So after we got that feedback, we started looking at new names and really looked at really what is our brand, what is it we want people to feel when they hear a name, and that is about being welcoming and that people can come as they are. They can count on us always being there, and it's a place where they can have conversation with others, both for victims of sexual assault, but the other piece we wanted to tie in there is our prevention work and a place for community to gather and have conversation as well around this issue.
Mitch, talk about how having the Blue Bench in our community sort of helps your department in dealing with sexual assault prosecution.
Well, there's a lot of ways that it helps because they have always kind of spearheaded what we call the Sexual Assault Interagency Council, and the primary member, I was assigned to that, in fact volunteered for it under Bill Ritter, and it's the kind of place where the people that serve victims of sexual assault come together. They really question themselves and their partners about how are we doing? You know, are we doing this right? And what can we do to improve it? And one of the proudest things I think that came out of it for me was down at Denver Health, which is one of our big partners because they do the rape examination. When they remodeled the emergency room, they created a suite for victims of sexual assault. It's very small, but it is because it's usually one person at a time. But our victims used to have to sit and wait in the emergency room, maybe with someone that had been stabbed, many people that were intoxicated, people that were bleeding, those types of things. Now there's a place for them to go where they're treated with dignity and respect. And the Blue Bench played such an important role in making sure that Denver got that in place. And we've done some things to improve it, and we've had nothing but benefit from that. There is an issue around this whole sexual assault that causes us problems. It's because we have victim advocates on board as soon as a case is filed. The hospital has victim advocates, the police have victim advocates, and they all try to work together. The problem we have is we can tell our victims about the Blue Bench, but we can't tell the Blue Bench about our victims because of privacy and those types of things. So what we find is that we have victims that are in the throes of incredible trauma because sex assault is such a violent crime. And they don't know where to turn, and they don't really, they're at a stage when we're dealing with them where they don't know they need to turn to the blue bench. So we may tell them 25 times, you need to go to the blue bench, they'll help you. They do these things. They don't hear us. And then 7 years, 5 years later, they find the blue bench because now they're at a stage in their recovery or a stage in the whole trauma that they find the blue bench and they say, oh, how come nobody ever told us about you? You do such great work. You're helping me so much. And our people are frustrated because that's what we do. We tell them, go there. And they are such a valuable resource for that.
Carmen, you want to talk a little bit more about that, about how you interface with, is it SAIC, Sexual Assault Interagency Council?
Yes, and actually, this started back, initially it was signed in 1995, and Mitch and I were working together then on it, so it goes back a long way, but that Sexual Assault Interagency Council is made up of folks from the DA's office, as well as the police department, Denver Health Medical Center, and community organizations. And it really is this way to bring together when cases don't go well, what do we do different, as well as, okay, what worked that time when that case went from the beginning through the whole criminal justice system and there was success, how do we learn from that so we can repeat that more? But it's really become a very safe place to have conversations about what's happening to victims following an assault. And thanks to Mitch and to folks at the Denver Police Department at this point that are really involved with it, you know, that those relationships are getting stronger, and it's not like we're attacking each other in those meetings. We are actually working together, understanding where the other side's coming from, and figuring out how we do that better to make it a more welcoming experience for victims of sexual assault.
Yeah, because they've gone through so much already, obviously.
Well, and if you think about it, there's a lot of sex assaults we can't file in case. They're just because of proof issues, because of the burden that we have and the filing standards that we have, we can't file those cases. But those victims need services. It's not that we don't believe the victims, and I think that sometimes that's the position they think, and it's not that. And when you sit down and you talk to them about what we have to do and why we can't do certain things and what our responsibilities are, the Blue Bench is really helpful in that. And part of the Sexual Assault Interagency Council is that we have a team from our office that when we're told they want to have this conversation, they want to understand, then we go in and explain to them. And they're not always happy, and it doesn't necessarily help, I don't think, but
Right.
More often than not it does.
Yeah.
More often than not, they say, okay, this happened to me, I need these things. I understand why we can't go to court. But that doesn't mean you weren't sexually assaulted, and that doesn't mean that you don't need help. And we're still there to help.
Absolutely.
Our victim comp helps, but the Blue Bench is an incredible resource for us.
Certainly having that soft place to land and a good ear to talk to. Can you talk about how many cases of sexual assault there are compared to those that are reported?
Yeah, the average research across the country, Denver being the same, is that less than 50% are ever reported.
Less than 50%?
Yes. So that's a lot of people who don't feel comfortable sharing their story. And I think, unfortunately, this is an issue that still has so much taboo about it, and so so many obstacles. People know that it's hard for the DAs to win cases, and people also see, unfortunately, in the media, on TV, everywhere, what victims are put through, that often victims end up being put on trial as well as the perpetrators when they do report. So, that's something we work on and talk about a lot, is that our case managers work with people, stick with them through the criminal justice system So if things aren't going well, that we can be there to support them. But because we do have these relationships, we can also encourage them to feel comfortable with the idea that we, will be by their side and will help them in the, connect to the right people inside the system as well.
You mentioned taboo and the stigma that goes along with the victim. I think I read that 50% of the victims lose their jobs in the aftermath of a rape. Can you talk a little bit about what do you mean by changing the conversation about sexual assault and rape? What does that mean?
Yeah, when the Blue Bench was started, the statistic was 1 in 4 women were sexually assaulted in their lifetime. Today, the statistic is 1 in 4 women are sexually assaulted in their lifetime. And I think what we have done, and as we're really looking at our organization over the last few years, is look at the fact that, we have to do something about that. And a piece of that is how people continue to look at sexual assault. When you hear a story about a sexual assault, what you hear immediately is, why was she doing this? Why was she out here? Why wasn't she home by 3 o'clock in the morning? I mean, it's always about, what did the victim do wrong? Mm-hmm. And I think in some ways that's how people keep themselves safe, because they're like, oh, I would never do that, so this can't happen to me. But really, the question needs to be, why did the perpetrator decide to harm that person?
Right.
And to be violent against them? And that's the conversation that has to change. And I think a piece of that is that people need to understand it can happen to anyone, unfortunately, but how we respond to the victim and the perpetrator, if we actually reach a point where we decide to hold perpetrators accountable for their behavior, instead of always finding ways to blame the victim in this crime, then we have a change. Then we're changing culture. And that's why things like the NFL, that's, Title IX, there's so many of those things that need to, we have to raise this issue to a higher level, where we say that only the perpetrator is responsible.
We were talking about changing the conversation about sexual assault, and I imagine part of the conversation is we have to talk to our boys and young men about sexual assault. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts on that.
Oh, it's so true. None of this will change until we have all men as our allies with women around this issue. And what I know is we have many men, including Mitch, who are our ally in this issue. But it's not going to change unless men and boys decide to look at the world differently, look at women differently, with a great deal of respect and as a peer versus something less than. And we have prevention program that goes out in the school, so we are starting these conversations early to begin to try to have impact on youth, and teaching everyone to be a bystander. So everyone watches what's happening in the world around them and takes some responsibility to speak up.
What's a good age to start talking about this with young people?
Well, it's not always a comfortable topic, but I think you have to start with young kids, just so that they know they have a right to control who touches their body. And I think from a very, very young age, that's an important lesson to start with. I think as kids get older, then the conversation gets more involved. But unfortunately, you can't wait till they're in middle school. It's too late sometimes.
What Carmen's talking about there is that so many kids themselves are victims of some kind of sexual touching, fondling. We have a whole whole group of people that prosecute sexual assaults on children. And I think that gives you the window then to really talk about that and themselves, and then how you can't do that with someone else. And that whole idea that everybody has a right to say no. And when you hear no, you stop. And that's the critical piece.
Right.
You don't take advantage of someone that's passed out. You don't take advantage of people when they're sick. You know, some of the things we see around sexual assault, they make your skin crawl. I mean, we're talking about people in old folks' homes that don't really know what's going on, and people taking advantage of them sexually. So, I mean, it just, when you talk about changing the discussion here, it's hard to do. With normal people, it's hard to do. But we get a lot of very strange sexual offenders who I don't know if you can change the discussion with them. You just need to hold them accountable, and you really need to put them away from society so they can't continue to victimize people in this way.
And I imagine the discussion and the conversation impacts society as well as a jury that is going to hand down a verdict. What impact does the societal perception of sexual assault and a victim specifically have on jury outcomes?
A huge difference. And that's a huge part of changing the conversation, is that we need people to understand that this is not okay, that it is never okay to force someone to have any kind of sexual interaction that they are not comfortable with. And until that happens, it's harder for the prosecution to be able to prove a case when jurors hear the story of the perpetrator has a tough life and all of these other things that are not at all reality. And when the defense can continue to blame the victim and bring out all kinds of things to really knock who this woman is who's been violated. But that, it's not easy to do, and I know that from the work and the cases that go to trial, and that's what allows it to keep happening. Because until people are held accountable, they're not going to quit doing it.
It shocks me that we're having this conversation still in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Tamara, what goes on in a jury room is really interesting, and I have had a lot of experience with a lot of different jurors. And I got to tell you that a lot of prejudice comes out in the jury room, a lot of myths, a lot of things like, well, all of the things we've been talking about. Yeah, she had a right to say no, but what was she doing out there at 3 in the morning? I mean, all of those things come out. And you know how you know about that? Is the other jurors come out and tell you. They said, you won't believe what they were saying in there about this victim. Every single one of them you asked, does somebody have absolute right to say no to sexual advances? Every person said yes. We got back there, and it was like they were a different person.
Wow.
And you find that in a jury room. And the nice thing about picking if you were lucky enough to pick the right jury, then they won't do that. Mm-hmm. They may have it there. It may be a bias that they have, but they won't express it. But I have seen some very frustrated jurors, especially on sexual assaults, where they come out and say, those folks lied to you on jury selection. Because then when we got back there, all of the things that you said, and they all agreed, should not be part of their decision, was absolutely part of their decision.
And these conversations also need to change on a judge level, right, as well. The judge can be influenced by a society.
You know, I really think the judges I think the judges, at least the judges I've been in front of, which is only Denver, and I know you read about judges that say things and do horrible things in cases and all those, but I've got to tell you, the judges in Denver get this. For the most part, you know, we may not like the sentence they give, they may not agree with something that we put out or something like that, but when it comes to the sensitivity around this issue, I've got to say, I think the judges in Denver are a cut above a lot of the things that I read in the media.
Good, that's good to hear. We've been talking a lot about your work after a sexual assault occurs. What sorts of programs or resources do you have for preventive measures?
Sure. We have programs that go out and start talking with kids at a fairly early age. Our biggest programs that are used are our middle school program that's called Let's Talk About It. It's pretty informal, and it is a lot of role playing and introducing the idea of bystander, which is what research has really shown can make a difference. in teaching kids to look out for other kids and to pay attention to what they hear and encouraging them to speak up. We have a evidence-based program called Bringing in the Bystander that we do in both high school and college level. And again, it's a 5-day program, and we go in and we talk a lot about myths and those issues, but then we really explore situations kids see in school every day. Situations they see on the weekend, and talk through those and talk through how can you react in that situation. So it really empowers them to step up in a way. I think a lot of us see situations and we are like, oh, later I wish I would have reacted this way, but this gives them a chance to practice it before. So if they do see a situation, they know what they want to do.
And to move away from being a tattletale,
Yes.
but you're, like you said, empowering that person to actually do something.
Right. It is so much more positive.
You have a brand new facility you just opened up last month, right?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Yes. We have been in a big house for a lot of years and moved into a nice office space and where everything's new and we're really happy there. We're feeling like it's going to be great space. Our clients seem comfortable coming, and we've always worked to keep our space confidential and felt like being in a house was a better way to do it, and then realized that people walking in an office building could be coming in to see people from any kind of business there. So it really doesn't identify
That
them
makes sense.
in the same way it did even coming into the house.
And you're a partner with the Rose Andom Center.
Yes, been very involved in that planning and looking forward to having staff located on site there as well. Unfortunately, the highest percentage of sexual assaults occur by someone known to the victim, and the majority of those are people that have intimate relationships. And so it's the center that's focusing on this domestic violence, and we feel like sexual violence is certainly a big piece of that, and are very invested in that project and have been involved in the planning almost since the very beginning.
We have just about a minute left. Is there anything else that you'd like to tell us about the Blue Bench that we don't know?
Yeah, I think actually just that we're a resource. We are a community resource, and we can be a resource around prevention, and we're happy to work with folks if they can invite us into different settings. But we're also a resource for victims of sexual assault, and we can be reached 24 hours a day. People don't need to walk through that experience alone. That's what we want folks to know.
And that's probably the time you feel the most alone is when you've been attacked like that.
You can go online and learn about what their mission is and what they do. And of course, they are a nonprofit, so if anybody is interested in helping them in their mission, I don't think they'd turn down a check or something along those lines. And I'm serious, because the nonprofits in this city do a phenomenal job, but they need help. So if there's somebody out there that can share $100, $1,000, whatever it is for this kind of program, I guarantee you it would be well invested.
Especially during this season, this time of giving.
Yes.
Yes.
Carmen, thanks so much for being here. Appreciate
you.
your efforts and the hard work you do in the community, and thanks for being with us here. Thanks to Carmen Carter, Director of the Blue Bench, for being our guest today on Denver DA with Denver DA Mitch Morrissey. On this edition of Dialogue Denver DA, I'm Tamara Banks. We'll see you next time.